Hello, I'm Dan Lefevre. I'm farm manager at Critzer Family Farm as of last June. We're in Afton, Virginia, on the east side of the Blue Ridge, just over the mountain from Waynesboro. And we're right at the base of the mountain. So the field we're looking at here is Ruby June's. All our strawberries they were plugs that came from Aaron's Creek Nursery in Buffalo Junction, Southern Virginia, right on the North Carolina border. They produced 111,000 transplants for us. They were in trays of 50, and we planted them over a period of 4 days. Mechanical transplanter, one bed, 2 rows at a time, water wheel transplanter. This variety here is Ruby June. This is about 1 acre in here that we had of those. And then we have about 1.5 acres of Camarosa, and all the rest were Chandler. So we have a total of 8 acres of strawberries this year. 1 acre of Camarosa we carried over from last year to see how they do. Otherwise, everything's basically annual plasticulture strawberries. We For treatment, we did do a soil test, and most of the minerals were really pretty high on everything. Boron is the only thing that we're having issue with, and short. I did put on one field that was fallow last year 15 tons of compost, and boron was mixed in with that. Otherwise, on the fields, I put down lots of stimulants and biology just to get the soil working again. The soil is very compact from too much tillage and herbicide use over the years. So before laying the plastics, we put down humates, put fish hydrosylate, soluble seaweed, and molasses, and that was all to feed biology. On the fields where the fumigant was going to be put under the plastic, as was done in previous years, I did not put any biology on those fields until after the fumigant had dissipated and the plants were in the ground. On this field and the other field that had the compost on it, I put all the biology down along with the soil conditioner and plant biology foods and stimulants, and then laid the plastic on top. These first few rows in this field did get fumigant with them because the commercial layer, he started putting it down in this field with the fumigant, not understanding there wasn't to be any in this field. But the growth and health and look of these Ruby Junes was better than the ones that didn't have the fumigant under the plastic. So maybe there was some issues with some pathogens in this soil from previous years. It's been in strawberries continuously, probably for, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 years. As long as I've been passing here, and I've only been in the area for 5 years, it's had strawberries in it. So they did really well here. Lots of blooms on them before they were covered up at Thanksgiving. there is cover crop planted in here, but you'll see it where it grew out even better because they had overhead irrigation on the back fields to get those established. They were a little bit drier than this field. Here we've got chandlers, and they were planted. Everything was planted in about the third week in September. Had intended to plant the beginning of September, and that's when the plants were to come in, and we actually got the nursery to hold them 3 weeks because we were so wet in August we couldn't even get plastics down until the 7th of September. So, and then we had to wait, till the fumigant chlorpicarin was dissipated in these fields before we could plant. So everything then went in 4 days after arrival on I think it was the 19th of September. So these Chandler made a lot of growth. This was the best looking of the 3 Chandler fields, and a lot of runners on them. Chandler really makes a lot of runners. We did pull a fair amount of them, but there's still a lot more to pull. At about 6 weeks, we had an issue coming in on the leaves. It started getting brown spots in the leaves, and I couldn't determine really what it was. And by looking online at various leaf diseases, finally sent a picture of it down to Virginia Tech Disease Clinic, and then they asked for plants as well, and they determined it to be powdery mildew, which apparently by a strawberry person, I think from North Carolina, said it's not an issue, so we didn't do anything about it. Did not see much or any of it in Camarosas and Ruby Junes. It basically was an issue just with the Chandlers. So we did have some fruiting on a few of these plants at about 6 weeks, and lots of growth. More on the Chandlers went into runners than into flowers like on the Ruby Junes. In these fields, the biology I put on them was put on after the plastics were laid. I used multiple materials, but I put it first on the plants immediately when they came in. I put micronutrients and biology, and I used double nickel, serenade, actinovate, howler, and quantum, and that is a liquid product with about 5 organisms in it. That's a soil organism inoculant, comes from Florida, and they have a 40-year track record. I had not used it before, but was going on information from the supplier about his very good response with it. And that was put on the plants in the trays, and then we mixed more or less the same thing along with some NPK, soluble nutrient, soluble seaweed, molasses, and humates. Used Terravita humates, and that went on in the planting solution in the water wheel transplanter. And then we put pretty much the same thing as far as biology in on the drip after they were planted, and then after they were established, probably about 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks later, I went back in and used a field sprayer and put it in over top of everything to get biology into the areas between the rows, the covered rows. So we also used overhead irrigation on these 3 Chandler fields because immediately after planting we had really hot, dry weather, and the drip irrigation was not getting up to the top of the soil enough or spreading enough to be able to get the plants established. They were drying out, so we put overhead irrigation in, and that made a huge difference. We had much less die out. So we let the irrigation is still set up in the fields, and we'll be using it this spring for frost control, as well as probably putting covers on and off. So that's a huge effort. All right, for the cover crops in here, I had a mixture of tillage radish. The predominant was low boy annual ryegrass, which is a low growing one, and then I added in crimson clover, which is a winter annual clover, and Dutch white clover. Don't know if the tillage radish is going to freeze out or not, especially that it's under covers. We haven't had cold enough temperatures to do it yet, so, and not probably from here on out won't. So probably going to have to mow this one time, and then we're hoping, since most of this is pick your own, that the foot traffic will keep down the covers after that. Did not do any pre-plant cover, but expect to do next summer after these berries come out, to put in a cover crop summer cover cocktail mix, and probably a fair amount of mustard in with that as a biofumigant on plow down. Just didn't have time to do it this year before planting, time to lay plastics, but then that got delayed because of all the rains. This cover was seeded over top of the plastics. Then I went down each row with a backpack blower, blowing it off of the plastics into the row, and that did a pretty good job. There was only a few places where a little bit stayed on the plastic, and it got down in and came up as weeds. Mostly that was annual rye that did that. All right, here we're going to show you the difference between Camarosas on black plastic and Camarosas on white plastic. The ground under the white plastic was about 10 degrees cooler than the ground under the black plastic, just by hand feel, and it definitely reduced the amount of growth in the fall. We're hoping that it will delay the push out in the spring, so we have less problems with frost damage. That was the main objective. This field was a field that had the compost on it, and it's a very low field and poorly drained, so it's pretty cold soil to begin with. But we'll see, how it turns out come spring. We also had more weed problems in here just because it was a weed fallow before it was planted. There's a lot of dock growing in between the rows, and in the plants we got a fair amount of wild geranium, a little bit of chickweed, and my liquid gluten pre-emergent did not work perfectly, but probably reduced some weed growth. So I didn't have a control to really check it out.